Because I went on the Women's March last week, I'm being accused of just jumping on a bandwagon, and that's a fair thing to say because I've been in politics for almost 8 years at this point, and I've met a bunch of people who are really just in this just to be in this, for the clout. They don't actually care about doing right by the issues they talk about. And because not all of you know what I was doing before I got into politics, you have no reason to trust me. So without wanting to sound too much like Yuval, I'm going to remind you who the fuck I am. I studied law with French at university. I did that because Boston Legal, especially this man here, gave me an unrealistic expectation as to what being a lawyer would actually be about. I thought you could get up and tell the judge, do this because it's the right thing to do, but instead being a lawyer is more like, do this because a judge 100 years ago also did this. And so I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer in pretty much September of first year. And so when I graduated, I was like, all right, I've done law with French. How do I use that for good? Well, I guess it must be international law. How do I do that in sort of a moral way? International human rights? And so I started applying to the UN, to the EU, that sort of stuff. But they all require a master's degree and about 7 years of experience, which obviously I don't have because you haven't given it to me. And so I had to work my way up to that, including doing a season of customer service in a ski resort. As French-speaking head of customer service, I proved that I could use my French skills professionally. And I eventually managed to get my foot in the door of European politics. In fact, that's the EU Commission right there, by working for a lobby firm. I know, not proud of it. And they offered me an extension of my 6-month internship and a pay rise, which I turned down, choosing instead to work for almost nothing at the European Centre for Democracy and Human Rights, which focused on human rights abuses in the Gulf states, so primarily Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. Why would I make that kind of choice? Because I grew up on superhero shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, making this, in 2010, the single best day of my entire life. Hell, this was my wall at university. Simply put, I was never going to be happy unless I felt I was doing good. And so I then went to work for an anti-lobbying firm, a charity that exposed and fought against the influence of corporations on politics, which I felt sort of balanced out previously working for a lobby firm. And while I was in Brussels, I was also on women's marches there. That's the Repeal the 8th march, which took place across the world. But I left Brussels and went to Vienna for what was essentially my dream job. I was the advocacy trainee for the EU Fundamental Rights Agency. And given that my main skill is advocacy, my main academic background is EU law, my main passion is human rights, that was the dream. I only left that job because I perceived Brexit as being a bigger threat to human rights than anything I was working on, because it would empower the Tories to do even more horrendous stuff with human rights. And clearly, I wasn't wrong. So yeah, I talk about a bunch of different things now, from Brexit to feminism to racism to changing the voting system, but they all come under the same category of me just trying to do good because that's the only way I know how to live. If you want to call that jumping on a bandwagon, go ahead.